Hello, Chris. Oh, hello. How are you? It's great to have you on here. How you doing?
I'm great, thank you, Christianne. Thanks for asking me to come on.
Oh, I'm so thrilled that you've agreed to, because in the aftermath of watching Leaving Neverland, I keep wanting to say Finding Neverland, as I spoke to you just before, I kind of feel like I need therapy myself after watching it. It was so dramatic and so upsetting and so provocative as well. And since I've watched that, I found myself watching lots of other things on the internet about Michael Jackson or about this whole court case and all the evidence before. And there's been loads of discussions on social media. So I really wanted to get you on because you have so much more knowledge than most of us on the history of sexual child abuse, how, the statistics on it, how people behave, how people groom. So I just want to ask you loads of questions, and really, ultimately, like you said, 1 in 4 people, the statistics are now, that have sexual abuse. So, it's going to be that a lot of people listening to this, it's happened to them or it's happened to somebody they know. And I think because this is in the media at the moment, it's going to be a huge trigger for people. So I just want to help support people through this as well. So thank you for coming. So Chris, tell me a bit about your background, because you're a consultant for the Independent Inquiry into Child Sexual Abuse. What is that?
So the ICSA official Independent Inquiry into Child Sexual Abuse was set up in 2015 to look at institutional failings when they're dealing with child sexual abuse. So there was lots of victim and survivors coming forwards saying that they had been abused and saying that they hadn't had the appropriate response. No one was listening to them. There was no redress for them. There was no aftercare for them, specialist support for them, and it was just growing momentum. It seemed to be coming from all corners, so to speak. And so Theresa May, when she was Home Secretary, decided to set up an inquiry into institutional responses or institutional failures to child sexual abuse, and that's when I became involved right back then in 2015. So there's 3 strands to the inquiry. There's the research project, which looks at every single bit of research that's ever been written about child sexual abuse, narratives, statistics, anything and everything to do with child sexual abuse. Then there is, and they're doing their ongoing research as well. Where there's gaps, they're doing research into those gaps. There is the Truth Project, where victim and survivors or even whistleblowers can go along and either have a face-to-face sit-down meeting and share their lived experiences with the inquiry to say, this is what happened to me, this is how I was failed, and this is what I want to change for the future, for better protection of children in the future. Or they can write in with exactly the same thing, how they were failed, what happened to them, and what changes they want to see. And then there is the public hearing side of the inquiry, and you've probably seen it over the TV where we've done investigations or public hearings into the Catholic Church, for example, and now Westminster is on as we speak. So what the inquiry is going to do, the panel, they're going to look at everything from those 3 strands and build this big picture of exactly what's been going on in England and Wales since day dot, right up till now, and say, right, okay, what has happened? What does the picture look like? What are the problems that we have? And what other solutions are needed? And then they're going to make recommendations based on their findings. But it's up to the government to what they're going to implement or not. And that's where a lot of people are not comfortable with that, because we're doing all of this work, spending all of these millions of pounds, and we want to see action. We want to see the solutions being put into place. But ultimately, at the end of the day, the inquiry hasn't got that power. They can do what they've been remitted to do, but they can't make the government do or implement these robust recommendations. However, I am hoping that there is going to be enough voices, if things aren't implemented, to actually even take to the streets if need be and get them implemented when the time comes. You know, we've got Brexit going on at the moment, so who knows what's going to happen.
Yes, exactly. So is there anything similar going on in the US?
Not that I know of.
No.
Not to the degree that we've done in England and Wales, because we are the world's biggest inquiry into child sexual abuse that's ever happened. Yeah.
Really?
So Australia did theirs, the Royal Commission into Child Sexual Abuse, and that ended last year. And obviously they've got their findings. So we inquiry on some of what they've done, especially all the good stuff that's come out of that inquiry. But to my knowledge, no other country has yet done an inquiry as big or as complicated or as complex as the one that we are actually running at the moment.
So it's interesting, isn't it, with the Michael Jackson trial, because when you look at the trial that he went through, and neither of us are jurors, so we can't, or in court, so we can't really say if they did or didn't do it. But just looking at the evidence from that second trial in particular, when I've been reading up on it, and there's various staff members saying that they saw things, but it was really on the testimony of the two boys who said no, nothing happened. It seemed to clear him. So do you feel like that is because we've moved a lot further forward in time now, and we're not more knowledgeable about the subject, and that was a fairly new subject to go through courts? Or what do you think happened there? And also, what do you think about this documentary, Leaving Netherland?
Hindsight's a wonderful thing, isn't it, Chris?
Yeah.
And to me, as a survivor, and gut knowing how grooming works, because it happened in my family over and over and all around me, and knowing other victim survivors' lived experiences, I can clearly see that Michael Jackson groomed and did something inappropriate. As you said, we wasn't there, so we can't say what exactly happened. But from where I sit, I always believe the child over the adult until the child is proven not right. Because if that child is not listened to and is not believed, they're shut down, they're silenced, and often the mental and the physical impact of that shutdown and being silenced has a lifetime effect. So where I sit is I always believe the child, no matter what. No matter what. Because I guess they have got a voice.
But I guess the problem with the Michael Jackson trials is that there is a money motivation, isn't there? Now, when people talk...
Both sides, Chris, though. On both sides.
Absolutely. And when people talk about the argument of the money, particularly with these two guys in this documentary, I do think, God, would it really be worth it to go through all that? Because they have had to put their families through it as well. They've had to say to their, they've had to lie to their mums, and then the mums feel horrendously guilty, and then the mums are getting a bashing by the media. Their siblings, I just think, would they really do that? I just don't know. I just can't really see how they would put themselves through that for money. Maybe they would.
From where I'm sitting, from my perspective, you don't make up going through child sexual abuse. You just don't do it. But some people do. There are proven liars out there. However, when you actually look at what the boys are saying, and it wasn't just those two boys, there were other boys that were paid off earlier on.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Okay. wasn't just, but when you look at what they're actually saying, when you actually look at the bigger picture, as you said, and look at the surrounding family members and what they're saying and how it all pieced together, it doesn't make sense to me that these are just good actors and they're all acting and they all know what to say and they all know the right things to say. They are expressing, in my opinion, true feelings and emotions that come from having been through child sexual abuse.
So what about the arguments against them? Because one of the arguments against I've been hearing is that how do they have such an incredible memory of something that happened when they were 7, when most of us can't remember this? We can't remember last week. So how do they have this memory of the conversation? I mean, from where I'm sitting, my feeling is that the clients that I've worked with quite a few clients through healing and through nutrition who have been through child sexual abuse, and they either have a very poor memory, especially if it happened when they were much younger, or they have a very, very acute memory, like they remember absolutely everything, and that tends to be when it happens when they're slightly older. When I say older and younger, I mean if they were 3, they can't remember it. When they were 7, they can, and the memory is really like, remember the clothes they were wearing and everything. So what's your feeling about that?
So I remember everything quite clearly as if it was yesterday. And the thing is, I remember all of the bad things that happened, but I don't tend to remember any of the good stuff that happened, because you're almost sort of like, your brain gets fired and wired at the time things happen.
Yeah.
And the stuff that I went through, the mental and the physical abuse, was all the time. But the sexual abuse in and outside the family wasn't all of the time. So I remember the specific events because it wasn't all of the time. I know other victims and survivors that had child sexual abuse day in, day out, and they can't remember everything. No. They just remember that this happened over this many years, and it was this type of event that happened to me. This type of abuse that happened to me, but they can't obviously remember every single individual thing because it happened too much, too often. And some victims and survivors disassociate. So basically, if they've been through horrific abuse, often this is the case, not in all cases, but in many, then the part of the brain that is the survival part will shut out all of the abuse that happened in order to protect that individual. So every victim and survivor is different. We all respond to things differently, depending on, as you said, our age, what else was going on in the family, was there any love, nurture, caring from anybody, the whole setup. We all are impacted. We've got very similar impact, but the way that we respond to it is different. There's no one size fits all in this, So all I can say to you is that in my work, victim and survivors, as you have said, they either do remember everything because maybe it's not as prolific as someone that's been through it day in, day out, night in, night out, and they can't remember every bit of abuse that's happened to them. They just remember this over this timeline. And again, our brains just react differently to it. But I honestly can say, if you haven't been through it, until you've walked in someone's shoes, how can you have an opinion one way or the other?
I know some of the arguments that I've heard against, I'm like, daft, what are you talking about? But so why do you feel? So another argument was, why have they left it so long? I mean, I don't think they have left it long. I know clients who've come to me who waited till they were 60, 70, or never said anything because it would have such a catastrophic effect on their family. They don't want to hurt people. They're embarrassed that, you know, they don't want to be tarnished with this. So I don't think it actually is that long because they're only in their 30s. But why do you feel that they didn't speak out earlier? Or why don't people?
Yeah, some victims and survivors don't actually know that what they are going through is abuse.
Yeah.
Especially, you know, as you said, we can't say 100% sure of what happened. However, if you are in a loving kind of relationship, and the way that it was portrayed on those documentaries, there was that loving relationship. They hero worshipped him. They would basically do anything that he said he wanted. And there didn't seem to be any aggression in those relationships. There was just pure friendship, pure love, pure adoration. And when the boundaries of, you know, sleep in my bed were very blurred, in that circumstance, the opportunity is there for any individual to sexually abuse a child if that situation is created, because all you do, you just think, well, is this a game? If you've got no body awareness, if you don't know about body safety, if you don't know what abuse is and what abuse isn't, you're not going to know that is you're going through is child sexual abuse. You're just not. You don't have the language for it. All you will either know is this don't feel right to me. You know, it makes you feel horrible. Or some children, victim survivors, actually are respond in a positive way to abuse, not because they want to, but because our bodies are built to respond to pleasure. So for some people, it is a pleasurable experience bodily, but mentally, they're probably screaming, please stop, I don't like this, you know, but you've got no control over how your body responds when you are so unaware of how your body should or shouldn't respond, or mentally, if you've got no history of knowing what abuse is and what abuse isn't, how are you gonna, how can you speak out about it? How? You just can't.
Yes, and I completely can understand that because they were groomed so brilliantly, but, or, you know, in inverted commas, maybe not. But Wade Johnson did go on trial, I think, when was he about 13 or 12, or he was fairly young, but he did go on trial, and he went, was it when he was 12 or 13, and then he went again when he was 22, and both times he denied any wrongdoing. And he said he didn't know, still when he was 22, that there was any wrongdoing. But I do wonder about that. I do wonder, well, how could you not know? Because you're going on a trial where everybody's saying it's wrong. So why did he not know? Because he says he didn't realize till his child was born, and then, you know, he saw images of Michael with his child, and he realized then that was wrong. So why do you think he didn't get it?
Again, I'm not inside this man's brain, so I don't know what he's thinking and feeling. However, from what I got from watching that, he was saying that he wanted to protect, even right up to that moment when he got subpoenaed to go to that court to deny that MJ had abused him. Even right up to that moment, he idolized. It was his friend. He didn't want to hurt him. All of these things.
Yeah.
This is also sort of like normal to any victim and survivor. When they want it to, when they realize what's happened to them, they want it to stop, but they are frightened to speak up because they don't know how the disclosure is going to be received. They don't know if they're going to be believed. So in my instance, my mum knew about the abuse, yet she was adamant that it was not taking place, and she was adamant that we were lying. But as I was an adult, I got it out of her that she knew, and we've now got paperwork to prove that she knew. It's in black and white. So as I said, history and hindsight is amazing. But when you're going through it, when you are trying to find the courage to verbalize what's going on for you, you've got so many other things to worry about. Am I going to be believed? Will I be protected? Will I make matters worse? Are my family going to be split up over this? Because a disclosure will often either bring people together or blow the family apart. And in many cases, it blows the family apart.
Yeah. So you were speaking about your mum then. What do you think about the mums? Because I'm seeing a real bashing on social media against the mothers. It was their fault. They made their children very vulnerable. They were really naive. They were money grabbing. But just to kind of defend them a little bit and play devil's advocate here, when my daughter gets obsessed with something and she asks me and my husband over and over again, I want that, I want that, I want that, and we're like, no, we're not going to give you that. It's not great for you, or we'll spoil you if we give it to you, whatever. We do cave in as parents eventually, don't we? We're like, oh, go on then. And so, I was obsessed with Michael Jackson when I was 10, 11. I absolutely was in love with the guy. And if my mum said, there's a possibility of you meeting him, and then he said, do you want to sleep in my room? And he made a pass at me. Well, I would have just been absolutely beside myself with happiness. I wouldn't have told my mum, and I would have cried at my mum till she let me do it. So I can see from their perspective how it happened, because particularly Wade Johnson, he was really, he was absolutely besotted with this guy. So I can see, although we're all saying, how could you let them sleep together? I can also see how that happened. What do you think?
Again, I can see how it happened, but I'm just sending a warning out to all mums out there that most abuse, child sexual abuse, happens within the family home.
Yeah.
Or extended family. So, and the way that Michael Jackson worked, he groomed the family. He became a friend of the family. Those mums treated Michael Jackson as a son. They completely trusted him. And because they trusted him, they allowed their children to be around him all of the time. Hindsight, again, wonderful thing. If the man down the road, and I've heard and read this on social media, if the man down the road come and knocked on your door and said, can I help out to look after your children? And by the way, can he sleep in my bed, or can she sleep in my bed? You would go, don't think so. On your way, phone the police. But because this person, Michael Jackson, and all other sexual offenders who do groom the family and get in the family, and then they go on to abuse the children, that's how they work. That's how they operate. So, and they know exactly what they're doing. They know exactly what they're doing. So the awareness for all of society is, who is around your kids? What are they doing with your kids? And again, people say, well, you're scaremongering. We need to trust our friends. We need to trust our relatives. Yeah, you do to a certain extent, but your ultimate aim is to safeguard your children. So make sure you know where your children are. Make sure you know who they're with, and have a conversation with your child at all times. Keep the lines of communication open and ask them, what did you do? What have you been doing? We do not keep secrets. Teach them body safety, teach them body awareness, show them that, what is underneath their clothes belongs to them and nobody else. And if anybody, no matter who they are, whether it be granddad, grandmother, dad, mum, siblings, uncles, aunts, friends, anybody, if anybody touches you here and here, you tell us. Unless we equip it's not our children's responsibility to protect themselves or disclose, but if we have a culture where we have this dialogue with our children and we allow the door to be open all the time, because we do know that this abuse does happen. Don't shut your eyes to it. Don't ignore it. Don't put your head in the sand. It happens. And it's so prevalent. It's so normal that we need to have our eyes open and be aware. And if our child comes to us and says, this happened, or this happened, excuse me,
Okay.
we believe them. We believe them 100%, because that's our job.
So if you do say to your child, you know, have you been touched here and here, and they do say yes, what is the next stage? What do you do?
The next stage is to contact the police, because the first disclosure from a child, no matter what age they are, is really important. And even as parents, we are not equipped to get the information out of them that is needed for maybe a prosecution down the line. But also, we can inadvertently traumatize our child even further if we did ask the wrong questions at the wrong time. So it's almost like you hear it, you log it, and then you go to the police and say, what's the next steps? Of course, you don't let the child go with that person or anything like that. It's about protecting your child, but then putting into action what needs to happen, a report to the police.
Yeah. So in the case of Michael Jackson, these boys supposedly were groomed, and it was in a loving environment, and it wasn't aggressive, and they continued being in love with Michael Jackson until they realized that it was fundamentally wrong what he was doing. But not all cases are like that of childhood abuse, are they? It's not always about grooming and being loving. I mean, it can be very aggressive and very frightening. It's not. And I'm guessing, and maybe you can answer me on this, that because the question I was going to ask you was, are there any telltale signs that a child is being abused? But I'm guessing in the grooming side, it's going to be a lot harder to read because they don't necessarily know it's happening to them. But on the side where they're being fearfully abused, I guess there would be more obvious signs of them withdrawing. What do you feel? Is there any obvious signs? I mean, there's probably physical signs, aren't there?
Sometimes, as I said, sexual offenders are usually master manipulators, so they know where to abuse and how to abuse and to cover their tracks. So often in the start, most abusers, sexual offenders, are very nice people to their victims. It's only after they've got what they want, i.e. they've carried out the act of abuse, that they then ramp it up and say to the victim, the child, if you say anything, this will happen. Either someone will get hurt, or someone will end up in prison, or they will end up in a care home. There's always a threat to keep the silence.
Right.
And often the child then starts to feel, without knowing, but starts to feel a bit of shame and guilt, especially if they've responded in a positive way to the sexual offender. You know, they start internalizing, and it becomes harder and harder to actually speak out because of the way that the grooming process happens. Can you remind me of your second part of your question? Sorry, my brain's going all over the place.
So is mine. Well, I was just saying that what are the telltale signs? Yeah.
Right. So for me, the telltale signs would be if your child was a quiet child and then all of a sudden they've become extrovert or a problem, there might be something happening. If your child was an outgoing child and all of a sudden becomes withdrawn and silent, or, you know, starts doing something like self-harming or just gets very introverted, that also is usually a sign of something happening. So it's the extremes, because they don't know how to deal with what is going on for them. So the obvious signs, as you said, will be bruises maybe, or mum, I'm sore. I'm sore. because they might not have the words.
Yeah.
Or if a certain person shows up, all of a sudden they might not want to go with that person anymore. And it's almost like that person will turn up and go and like be the happy, outgoing person that they are, offering help or whatever. And some parents inadvertently might be pushing their children towards to go out with that person. You know, don't be silly. Come on, you know this person. Off you go. So if there's any reticence about being around people, or extreme like Michael Jackson, they wanted to be around him all of the time, all of the time. Why? Yeah. So it's often the extreme. So if there's no obvious signs like bruising, or you know that the child clearly does not like that person anymore for whatever reason, doesn't want to be kissed by them, hugged by them, seems to be a bit withdrawn, seems to be a bit frightened, a bit weary, any of that, if that's not obvious, then look at the extreme in the behavior change of the child.
But then how do you persuade that child, if you really, really sense that something is going on? How do you persuade that child that it's okay to open up to? Because with the cases of Wade Johnson and James Safechuck, they both say that, and the mothers say they asked them over and over again and they denied it. And Wade Johnson denied it twice in court, and he went on loads of different shows I've seen him on saying, no, he's a really nice guy. So they were obviously very brainwashed. How do you get through that? How do you communicate with someone who's like that?
You might not be able to until they become adults and they choose to disclose what actually happened, like these boys have done. At the end of the day, if it's your child and you are honed into it, you will know. You will have a gut reaction to what something's up.
Yeah.
And then you will need to work with your child to try and have that conversation with them, depending on their age and their ability to be able to have that conversation. But as you said, you know, I've even had victims and survivors come on my timeline and say, I denied it when I was first asked, second, third time. And it wasn't until I felt safe, I chose to disclose.
Yeah, because
the fear, Chris, the fear of disclosing is huge. It's huge.
It's huge, and it's also a fear built from childhood, which is even more magnified, isn't it? You know, as an adult, we can rationalize it and think, well, why is it fearful? But when you're a child, you're scared of a lot more, aren't you? So that fear is inbuilt as part of your nervous system, as James Chuck said, Safechuck said. So we've been speaking about it from our children's perspective, but as an adult listening and watching that, if they're triggered and they are, have never had counselling or never dealt with it, what are the steps for them? What would you suggest for them to do? Because I know you help people, don't you, with your charity?
Yeah, I do. But if often, you know, at the moment, and has been for a couple of years since Savile, there's been so much media, and there will be even more media over the next 2 years, because it's going to come at us left, right and centre from all institutions, because it's everywhere. People, victims and survivors, are telling me that they are getting triggered. I even trigger myself when I share stuff on social media. So I've been quite mindful about what I share and what I don't share. However, because I do what I do need to share stuff, because I need to show people that it isn't that person down the road. It's people that you know. It might be someone in your family, as you said, or it might be your next door neighbour, it'd be someone in your community. There is someone that you know. And it's triggering for us. So when we get triggered, we need to be able to ground ourselves in the here and the now. And if you are a victim and survivor, maybe it's best that you keep yourself away from TV and media, so that you don't get.
Oh, really?
It can be, you need to take yourself away from that. Because that's what I do from time to time. I have to completely remove myself in order to keep myself safe. But if it's bringing up things for you and you've never disclosed, you've never spoken about it, there are lots of specialist support services out there, even though they are underfunded, oversubscribed. There are more and more helplines that we can access to speak to people. So Samaritans, the Survivors Trust, Rape Crisis, Survivors UK, which is male only, NAPAC, National Association for People Abused in Childhood. There are so many organisations out there. These are nationwide helplines, and then they can tell people what's in their local area if that's what they need. But for me, if a victim or survivor decides to disclose, because often people so many just come into my inbox and just tell me their whole life history, and I'm like, that's really triggering for them and for me. So I sort of like to them, you know what do you feel you need? Because I can't tell anybody what they should and shouldn't do. What is it that you feel that you need? And then we work from that place. But I often say, like, because I get asked advice about, well, who can I speak to get help? Do I tell the police? I don't really want to go down the police route. What does the police route look like? What does the criminal justice system look like? And as you know, we're nearly 3 years down the road with our own case. There's so much. Once you disclose, it sends a ball rolling down the hill that gathers momentum, and you don't know where that ball's going to end up. Yeah. So it's really, really important that people do have support around them, and that they are believed, that they're not judged, and whoever is on the receiving end of the disclosure, what is it that you need me to do for you? How can I help you, without passing their own judgment on it?
So when people do disclose, and as we've discussed, it must be the most frightening thing on earth, disclosing it for lots of reasons. When they do disclose, from your experience, does it improve their life? Because that must be something that they're weighing up in their head. Like, is this really going to make me feel better by throwing my family apart and saying that this family member was a child molester? Or, in the case of Michael Jackson, they're getting a lot of support, but also a lot of backlash, death threats, and all the rest. So does it improve their life, disclosing everything?
So again, I can only speak from my perspective and what I've heard from others. When you are silenced, you have going around your head and your body chronic stress and overwhelm because you're not being heard. Yeah. All those thoughts and feelings that you have are held in your body. Have you heard of a book called The Body Keeps a Score, Chris? I don't know if you have.
No, I haven't.
The body keeps a score. It knows what stress it's been through. And until you have had the opportunity to verbalize, like let out what is gone on for you, until you've had the opportunity to speak your truth, I believe that the brain and the body does not start to heal. That's my personal belief, my personal opinion, because I've worked with too many people now, and myself. I've worked with too many people now for that not to be true for most of us.
Yeah.
But there are some people that have said that they would never speak publicly, like not even to their family. They've told me never publicly. They would take it to their grave.
Yes. I've had clients who've said that as well,
but they have told you, and they have me, so they've told somebody. So I believe that when you are able to do that, that starts your journey of healing. And for some people, it will send them backwards before it takes them forwards. But I know too many people, their mental health, their physical health has taken such a knock in their later child life, their adult life, and their the adolescence and their adult life, and they're still dealing with the impact of not being able to disclose, tell their truth, be believed, be not judged, and to get redress and to get support. I hear all of the time. And when people are able to have their voice heard, that is often the start of validation for them.
Yes.
Someone actually has heard what I've said.
Yeah.
They believe what I've said. They, they are actually enabling me to let this out. Yeah. I call it the big rock stress that sits here, and it, if it still sits here, it's triggering the alarm system, the amygdala, the hippocampus. It's sending those chronic stress hormones through the body, and it does untold damage to mental and physical health. So when you're able to speak up, you can start. This is a phrase from Dax Moy. You can put the pin back in the hand grenade, make you safe, make the brain safe, and then you can start to heal and get on with your everyday life. So important. So to your question, yes, it's important.
Well, that's great to hear, because I worry about when people are caught, we don't know what happened to these guys because none of us were there, but when people are saying they're liars, and even people saying who haven't even watched the documentary, they're just liars, I just don't think that's very helpful or responsible to say that for other abuse victims, because they're going to look at that and think, well, look at the response they're getting. And you could possibly argue that's one of the reasons they haven't spoken up for so long as well.
Yeah.
So what do we do moving forwards from this? Because one of the positives we can take from this, Chris, is that, I know you have to go in a minute and I'll let you go, but one of the positives we can take... Okay. One of the positives we can take from this is that it is driving more awareness, and I'm guessing that I know you've been working on this case where a lot of celebrities are involved, haven't you, in the independent inquiry to child sexual abuse?
I've not personally working on it, but the inquiry's working on the prominent figures. So the prominent figures that could got away with it before, I'm guessing it's less likely that they'll be able to get away with it with this more heightened awareness. It's less likely that someone like Michael Jackson will be able to say, hey, I'm a child too, and that's why I'm letting these boys know. I mean, I'm guessing it's less likely that even someone pretending, or perhaps not pretending, to be a child in an adult body is going to get away with that in the future. What do you think? I'm hoping that you're correct in your surmisation of that this heightened awareness, even if people are against what the adults have now said, that they will have their minds opened to the possibility that child sexual abuse does happen, and it's very prevalent. And as I said, it happens within, the normal family home. It happens within society, within our communities. That the 3 in 4 in society that have not been directly abused themselves will have a deeper understanding of what is actually happening and what is the impact of, because these 2 boys, when they grew up, and it wasn't until they were adults and they had children themselves, this is quite common. When I had my son back in 98, that led to 2 years of my mental health sliding until I had a breakdown in 2000. Because when you are given a child, or that child becomes the age that you were when the abuse started, you've actually got a mirror being held up in front of you, and you go, oh my God, was I really that young? Was I really that vulnerable? Was I really abused at that age? And it really it triggers you, it froze you. And that is usually when people will disclose. They will either disclose then, or they will disclose when when they hear of another child that has been abused by the same person. Because some people that I know, they've never spoken to anybody, but as soon as they hear that someone else has been abused, then they will step up and go, you know what, I was as well by that person. Because it gives you the courage to do that, and it gives support to the victim that has come forward to have their lived experience backed up by somebody else, you know. So I am happy, as you say, that this heightened awareness will drive the narrative going forward, so there will be more conversations to be had, but also solutions need to be put in place. There needs to be such a vast investment made into specialist support services to help victims and survivors recover from what they've been through, because if they don't, Chris, it's the next generation that's impacted. The adults of today who have children tomorrow, if they don't deal with the impact of what they've gone through, that impact will pass down the generations. It has in my family. My mum was abused by her brother. It's passed down. My dad apparently was abused by somebody in his family. It's passed down. Now, don't get me wrong. Just because you've been abused, it doesn't make you an abuser. You have a choice. You have a choice. Yeah, I would never abuse my children, ever, just because I've been abused. So that myth that if you've been abused, you go on to abuse is complete and utter nonsense. However, if you have been abused and you do go on to abuse, that's a whole nother narrative and needs a lot more research into that, and it needs to be addressed.
But also you faced the fact that you have been abused and you're doing something about it, aren't you, in a huge way. So I'll wrap this up because I know you've got to go, Chris. Thank you so much for joining us. It's been really, really helpful, and I hope it's been helpful for our listeners as well. What can people do to get in contact with you if they need support? Do they contact you through Survivors of Abuse?
I don't actually do one-to-one counselling or anything. No. So I'm qualified to do that. So my organisation is set up to run the Cleaner Living workshop, the 8-week workshop, to help victims and survivors recover from their trauma in a holistic way. So that is what my charity is set up to do. However, people can contact me if they want posting, so that's absolutely fine. So I'm on Facebook, I'm on Twitter, they can inbox me whatever they need, but if they need crisis management, then it's their GP, it's Samaritans, it's any of those helplines that I've mentioned, the Survivors Trust, Rape Crisis, Survivors UK, NAPAC, any of the big ones, and then they will be signposted to the smaller charities that probably are working in their area. But as I said, Chris, it is such a big sector that is underfunded and oversubscribed, especially because of all of this abuse that is now coming to the fore. You know, we were talking about the Catholic Church earlier, and you said your own things to me. It's massive, and that's just one. You know, if it's happening in the Catholic Church, it's happening in the Anglican Church, it's happening in Scientology. I've watched loads of documentaries on Scientology. It's happening in Jehovah's Witnesses, it's happening in the Jewish community, it's happening in the Black community, it's happening in the Muslim community. It's everywhere. It's worldwide, you know. So this isn't just a new problem.
So what can we do then? I spoke about seduction a couple of nights ago on my VIP groups, and because what I really took from this whole documentary is that we are so seduced in our society by everything, by money, by people, by celebrities, by food. You know, the advertising agencies know how to play on that seduction, and it feels nice to be seduced, but it can often have a very negative impact. So what can we do to teach ourselves and teach our children to not be succumbed by this seduction? What can we how can we help them?
Balance it out by telling them about the, you know, the good side and the negative side. So you've got to tell them the full story. Yeah. So, for example, hindsight, wonderful thing, but this Michael Jackson thing, as you said, probably all of us, if we were given the opportunity, we would have loved to have, and we would have loved to have those opportunities that all of those had and the girls had. However, as parents, it's up to us to make sure we know who is around our children and to keep those lines of communication open with our children. And I think in this day and age that there are many parents are so stressed out, so overworked, that they don't even have that line of communication open with their children.
No.
They just don't. So that's where they need to start.
Yeah.
This is a cultural thing, cultural thing within the family. Have those communication lines open. Give the awareness and the education to their children. You know, that's how we do it. Yeah, yes, we can be seduced, and it's nice to be seduced by some stuff if it's healthy for us. But if it's damaging or negative to us, the kids need to know that side of it as well. This world can be a nice place, but it's a very dangerous place to be as well.
Yeah. All right, thank you, Chris. So let's end on a nice note. So it's the survivors of abuse, but we'll also post all of the helplines as well that you've suggested. And thank you so much for coming on and just bringing your perspective, because I've seen so much written about, so much talked about from people who aren't experts. So it's been really good to have you on and just create the bigger picture and how we can really help ourselves moving on. Thank you so much.
Anytime. Thank you.
All right. Lots of love. Bye for now.